honoured if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another YouTube episode of Film Stories with me, Dan Cooper. So it was reported widely last week that the rights to the mega franchise, the Terminator, could be reverting this year, in fact, to its original creators due to copyright laws in America that have changed, and the news that Gail Ann Hurd, who is the original 1984 film's producer and also has a screenwriting credit on the original film, she has issued a what is an aptly named termination of copyright notice, serving the franchise's current rights holders with notice that she intends to revert those rights to herself, and possibly, this bit's a little bit unclear, to James Cameron too, of course, who is the series' godfather and the creator. So I think we just have a quick, kind of very quick potted history through the Terminator rights and bring us up to where we are now. So the first film was made by James Cameron. It was made in 1984, and he made it for an independent production company, Hemdale. But crucially, at this point, Cameron sold the rights to the film and future films, and he did that to guarantee that he could direct, and B, that he couldn't be fired. He'd just come off the back of directing a movie in the Piranha series, and he'd been kicked off that project, and he wasn't keen to be fired again, and who can blame him? So he sold the rights to the Terminator with the stipulation that he had to direct, and depending on where else you read, that he also couldn't be fired. And of course that never came to be a problem, because the film went on to do fantastically well, and it spawned from a $6.5 million budget, it went on to spawn $80 million worldwide, and it was distributed by Orion. So the film was a real success, and kind of mashed up for the first time that cyberpunk sci-fi genre with some real B-movie slasher tropes, and just proved to be a wonderful movie and did fantastically well. However, then at that point, during the kind of the late 80s, things changed, and that Hemdale, that company, began to have its own share of financial woes, and its half share, because remember Cameron had sold half, of course, it sold its half share for $10 million, and that was in the early 90s to Coralco. Now Coralco, of course, were a infamous Hollywood studio or production company that were owned by the producers Mario Casar, Andrew Vajna, and they went on to, they were in a bit of this kind of spree at the time and something of a role, and they went on to get Cameron back involved and spent a ton of money, over $100 million, and went on to make, of course, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which in the pattern, the trend of Terminator films at that time, went on to, of course, do fantastically well. It made a worldwide gross of around $530 million. And that film was distributed by TriStar. So at this point, the franchise is a huge success. But then, much like Hemdale before them, Coralco ran into their own financial woes. They, of course, put out a string of flops. I mean, the whole story is much more complicated and interesting, but in the broadest terms, the films like Cutthroat Island, Showgirls, didn't help them to balance their books, and in fact, by the time Cutthroat Island came out, they'd already filed for bankruptcy, and their assets were sold off, and of course that would include the rights to the Terminator films. But interestingly, Casar and Vajna set up C2 and reacquired the rights. So a different production company reacquired the Terminator rights, and began to set up Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. But that film didn't do as well. I mean, Simon's covered that film in previous podcasts, and whilst it has its strengths, it just didn't set the box office alight. Of course, Cameron wasn't involved at this point. He kind of washed his hands of the franchise, partly because he'd confided, according to where you read, but he confided to Vajna and to Casar that he planned to reacquire the rights himself at that point, and they outbid him. So he washed his hands. He refused to be involved with that film, and whilst it made profit, it didn't make the kind of franchise building profit that gave its producers any confidence, and so the rights were sold again. Now, this time the rights were sold to a company. Things do get really a little bit financially complicated now, but C2 sold the rights to a company named Halcyon in 2007 for just over the 20 million mark, and at that point, Terminator Salvation went into production. Cameron at this point was still having nothing to do with the series, but the film was duly made with McGee at the helm. And if you've seen Terminator Salvation, again, it's film. It has its strengths. It's certainly an interesting setup. But at this point, it was making the least amount since the first time worldwide or domestically since the first Terminator movie, and of course was costing a lot more to make. This film made north of $350 million worthwhile. That of course was significantly less than the film before it, and that the element of reducing returns, of course, meant that the rights again by February 2010 were up for sale again, and controversially, though, or depending on your point of view, I suppose, at this point the rights were put for auction. The rights are up for grabs again. Then Halcyon as a company are struggling, and they go up for auction again. And they end up this time with a company named Pacifical. But the interesting thing here is that Pacifical is a creditor to Halcyon, so there's an existing financial relationship there, and the amount that the company owed Pacifical, that Halcyon owed Pacifical, was around $30 million, which it just so happens, is the exact amount that the franchise went for. So other kind of studios or other bidders in the process saw this as something of a stitch-up. Lionsgate were there. Lionsgate are the perennial Terminator franchise bidders. They've been at the auction several times, and always the bridesmaid, never the bride, unfortunately for them. Sony were there, who distributed, I think, the previous film, and were very kind of keen. I thought they had the inside track, but both studios lost out to Pacifico, of course, who had this existing financial relationship with Halcyon, and so Pacifico got the rights, and again they paid about $30 million, but wasn't actually paid because it was a credit owned. But by May 2010, although that deal had gone through, a year later, by May 2011, Pacifico, without having done really anything with them, were selling the rights at Cannes. That auction was, and Megan Ellison, the principal of Annapurna Pictures, bought the rights at that point, and there was a lot of speculation. I think that it was a package deal brokered by CAA, so it came with Justin Lin, the Fast and Furious director, attached to it, and unfortunately got already attached to Star. It came down again this time to a showdown between, this time, Annapurna Films, as I've just mentioned, and Lionsgate again, but Lionsgate yet again lost out at the last. And so Ellison had the rights, but the Terminator films aren't really a kind of what you consider to be an Annapurna property. I mean, Annapurna are an amazing studio, but they don't really look to make the huge blockbuster films. Booksmart is a great example of an Annapurna film. And so the rights were acquired by Ellison's brother, who owns Skydance Media. And Skydance Media put Terminator Genesis into production. It's believed to have been, Ellison's believed to have paid about $20 million for those rights. And so her brother acquired them. Terminator Genesis in 2015 was released, and that movie didn't really fail to ignite the box office either. And again, I think Simon has done a podcast on that one if you want to go deeper cuts with that fairly recently. And so we come to the point when Skydance are faced with, well, do we push on with the Terminator Genesis 2 as such? Do we reboot the franchise? And they were able to get James Cameron involved for the first time in several films. Cameron has been directly involved. Of course, he's produced. Tim Miller is directing, and that film releases at the end of this month. And hence a lot of Terminator news at the moment. And so what happens here really is the big question. Should Dark Fate fare well with audiences? Should it recoup its box office and make a healthy profit? Then it's logical to think that Skydance will want to follow up with a sequel. But then, of course, Galan heard the rights owner has put in a termination of copyright notice, meaning the rights could revert back to her, but it's complicated by international copyright law, which doesn't follow American copyright law, meaning that if she is successful, she will only get the rights back domestically. So the whole, and of course, we don't know quite where James Cameron's stance is on all this either. So it's interesting. It's an interesting situation. In the short term, I'll just settle for a really, really good Terminator film. I'm off to one of my local independents this weekend to watch Terminator 1 and 2 double bill. Terminator 1 is still the greatest Terminator film of all time, of course. But I'm interested to hear your comments if you disagree. But until we see Dark Fate, it's just good to see Terminator being talked about. Let's hope this time its fate is a little less dark and a little more successful. Thanks for tuning in and just picking up a quick part of history of the Terminator rights. Don't forget, you can get more film stories if you head to our website, filmstories.co.uk. We've got daily news updates, long form writing as well. It's become a very busy place. Of course, the latest issue of our print magazine, Film Stories, is about to go on sale as well. A picture of that should be with you right up on the screen now. Film Stories Junior, our film magazine aimed at young people, written by young people, is also, second issue is also about to release. On top of that, there's Simon's Podcasts, which you can find at your podcast provider of choice. And of course, you can find us on Facebook at Film Stories Online, and the whole Film Stories project is on Twitter. So, there you go. Please do, if you haven't subscribed already, please do subscribe. And I'll see you back here next week with another film story. Bye-bye.